Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak until the day wherein my words shall be performed. For they'll believe it's not my words in the day that there shall be, which shall be accomplished according to their season. And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. And when he came out, he could not speak unto them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them and remained speechless. And it came to pass after the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. And after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived and hid herself 5 months. For she said, Thus had the Lord dealt with me in the day wherein he looked upon me to take away my reproach among men. All right, so here we see, a continuation of John the Baptist's heritage and his introduction. Even though we don't, see his full, birth at the end, of these, particular scriptures, but we see the continuation of the conversation between the father, Zacharias, and the angel Gabriel that came to deliver the news. We see, a consequence for him not believing. In my last video, I so stressed and overemphasized the fact that this angel was delivering this message unto him, and that as they were introduced as being blameless before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances, upright, without fault, before the Lord, that they should have known and should have been mindful of the story of Abraham. He got his child at 100 years old, Sarah being 90, and they were stricken in age, and we could tell from the undertone that they had been trying for a long time, though unsuccessful. We see the angel, and rightfully so, because I know when the angel appeared unto him, he appeared in such a form. Because, when he saw him at the right side of the altar of incense, he was, so afraid. Obviously, this was not, a person, flesh and blood. Obviously, we could tell that, that he was either of light or some sort of, lightning or light that was not something seen every day. And seeing this, manifesting, being, this creature speak unto you, you should have been more ready to receive these words. So, he is struck with, he's unable to speak. We see even Mary, when she conceived, she hid herself and, she rejoiced. And, there's many lessons to be taken from, this encounter. We'll get into them and I'll cover as much as I'm able to. But, overall, we see, the visitation really of, John the Baptist's parents, by this angel. Even though not much is said, unto Elizabeth, we just see where he spoke to the father. We see, continuation of this conversation being in the temple. Now we know that he is in there serving during his course, the course of Abia, which is 8 out of 24 rotations that serve, 1 week. This rotation repeated, twice. So each priest serves for 2 weeks out of the year. And in my first video, I got into this, showing the reasons, so that nobody would get burnt out, nobody would get, favoritism, everybody would have an equal share of duties, nobody would be considered more important than the other, and nobody could get the big head, nobody could be left out, and it would also, ensure that there's always somebody fresh in the temple, because if you were to only serve for 1 week, then surely you would be there fresh, and then you would go back and wait until the 24 is finished, and then your turn comes again. So here how did we get here? We saw the introduction, the letter being written. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seemed good unto me also, having had perfect understanding of all things which were at the very first, to write unto thee in order, O most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. So that's the introduction. So, being sent to Theophilus, which I, broke down in the appropriate video that was found in. So then we see it go on to say, there was in the days of Herod, king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, to the course of Abia, whose wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous before God, walking in the commandments and ordinances, blameless, but that they had no son because Elizabeth was, barren, and, the couple being now stricken in years. And it came to pass, after he executed his office before God in the order of his course, that behold, the custom of the priests in those days was to burn incense when they went into the temple. Now, as the multitude stood without praying, while they executed the priest's order in the temple, behold, the angel stood on the right side of the altar of incense. Now, when Zacharias beheld the angel, he was, troubled, and great fear fell upon him. But the angel spoke to him and said, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. Now he shall be great before the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and shall be filled with the Holy Ghost, even from his mother's womb. And he shall prepare a people for the Lord. He shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And John, he said, wherein shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife very well stricken in age. And the angel answered and said, I am Gabriel, that do stand in the presence of God, that I'm sent forth to speak unto thee, to show thee these glad tidings. And then we pick up there. So, we start out with, the consequence to the father, Zacharias, for not having believed. We see him, being told that he shall be dumb and not able to speak. Now, as I already stated in a previous video, one can understand, him, as much as seeing this angel, one can understand his frustration, because they've been trying for years and years, and they've been praying. So they walk so upright before God, nothing is coming through for them. And now, this angel comes and he speaks these words, and that should be enough, right? But if you have to understand, his pain. And as we see, his wife Elizabeth's prayer at the end, take away my reproach among men. It was considered very shameful to have no children in those days. And I'll keep, reiterating that it was always assumed to be the woman's fault. In the older Old Testament, because this is the Old Testament coming towards the end where Jesus, died on the cross, bringing us over into the New Testament. Men, they had, several wives back then. So, if one was not able to bear and the others were, then we would know for sure that it was her, something was going on with her internally. Modern medicine, we have so many, different reasons for why, she might be unable to conceive. She might be able to conceive but unable implant. She might be able to implant but unable to stay implanted. She might have, interruptions for whatever reason. There are so many reasons why a woman would not be able to bring forth. And in those days, they didn't have the modern, technology of medicine that we do. But now, this couple, it just being one wife, one husband. No, it can be anybody's fault, but they'll always assume that it's the woman's fault. Because, they assume that, a man can produce, during intercourse. So they assume that he is, he's good to go, that there's no error on his fault. Having defective sperm, a low sperm count, having, chromosomal problems, creating stuff like, trisomies, Down syndrome, or missing chromosomal deletions. There's so many things that can go wrong on his part, but they always assume that it's the woman's fault. And having one wife, there's no real, way to tell the difference. But they were unable to, and we see him given this punishment, kind of a punishment. Those shall be unable to speak, and you have to understand his concern, because been trying for so long, being so disappointed for so long. As much as he's looking at this angel, this light, literal light, speaking unto him, he's asking for a token. Like, what if you come here and you tell me this, and I get excited and nothing happens? Who do I speak to? Who am I able to call upon? I need to have a way that if your words don't come true, I can come and hold you responsible, for coming here and telling us this and getting us all excited for no reason. So, that's where he is coming from. And, they were old and stricken in years. And to look at their, counterparts, their friends and family members, who they all, they brought forth children, and they have the joy of these, children running around in the house, and, seeing, their, posterity, seeing their descendants. Because if not, then they come and they die, and apart from any great thing they might have done, there's nothing else really for them to be remembered. They kind of get swept away in history, because yeah, they were righteous serving in the temple, but I mean, how many have served in the temple? Were people paid homage for being righteous? Not really, right? Because we see the chief priests, elders, and scribes, how they would plot to kill Jesus, them being so corrupted, him being grieved with all their words. But these two, they were, righteous before God. And, you'll notice a theme in the Bible where the righteous, a lot of times they'll be barren. But, know for without the shadow of a doubt that the children that they bring forth, that, they have such an impact on this world, working for God, being usually a prophet of some sort, them having their own book. And if not their own book, they have such a high, honor and remembrance, and their name, is so great. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, and behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak until the day wherein my words shall be performed. For thou believest not my words, which shall be accomplished in their season. So, he asked for a sign, and this was the sign that he was given. He was asking, he was, hoping, I would bet, for something externally. Forget which, prophet. It wasn't a prophet, it was a judge in the Old Testament, that he asked for a sign. He said, let first the ground be, let there be dew upon the ground, but the fleece let it be dry. Then he reversed it. The next night he said, okay, Lord, I see that you have done this, but now reverse it. Let the fleece now be wet and the ground be dry. And, God, he performed, both times. So, like I said, him coming from this place of frustration, of having been disappointed so many times. The Bible does say that Hope deferred maketh the heart sick. It maketh the heart heavy. Hope deferred, you hoping for something and not receiving it. The heart, the heaviness that can have on the heart. And this was a serious matter because in those days and even in these days, I mean, how many people that when they get older, I saw it was like a mini documentary, and they were speaking to people that never had children, and you can see the great regret. Those that they didn't take their younger years seriously enough. They found themselves doing all kind of things, and then they get to the end and they're left without never been married, no children, and you see the heaviness that's on their heart and the hardness. Especially around the holidays when like Christmas. The sound of children running through the house is one of the people discovering life. It's one of the greatest joys that they missed out on. So he was hoping for an external signal. Moses, he saw the burning bush. The bush burned, but it was not consumed. The Lord said, take off thy shoe off thy feet. The place wherein thou standest is holy ground. The Lord, he appeared unto Abraham himself. With Abraham, only the promise was given. And they waited on it so long, he gave up hope. And, Sarah gave her handmaid, Hagar, which gave him, Ishmael. So here Zacharias he was asking for something external, but he was given as the sign. So, behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak, because thou believest not my words. So, this was a sign as well as a consequence. I would like to see this a sign and a consequence, both in one. Thou shalt not be able to speak. So you shall know that it's on the way when you're unable to speak. And, as we'll see him coming out of the temple and not being able to speak. So he was able to rest assured, knowing that this promise was being fulfilled. Now, we don't really see him communicating, telling them what he saw, what the angel said. I'm sure at some point, because as we'll see further down, when the child is born, they asked him the name and he was unable to speak. They wanted it to name the child after him. But, right now the angel is telling him that he shall be called John, and he had to write it down. So, was he able to write it down to his wife and tell her what was coming? Because we don't really see here of her being given a promise. It just happens, and she hides herself. And this sign is also, I can further elaborate and say that, sometimes God, he doesn't want you to tell people, things that he's doing for you, that he's promised you. Because, you never know the heart of people around you. You might be praying for something, they might be praying against you. Witchcraft is, alive in these days. Tell the wrong person, now you have a whole stronghold, of, demons against you. So, I imagine that this must have brought him such great comfort. Yeah, he was unable to speak, but here's a sign, a strong sign, that this thing is real and it's coming to pass. It must have gave him such, comfort. He must have, been able to just relax in his spirit, knowing that he would not leave this, world childless. So behold, thou shalt be dumb and unable to speak until the days that my words shall be fulfilled. Because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. Some, things in the Bible are given immediately. The example of the fleece I used earlier was for victory in a battle. So that was given kind of like not, many days after. But, a child, that's going to take time, for her to conceive and to bring, 9 months to bring that child to term. Abraham, he received the promise at, 75, I believe. He got the child at 100. Imagine waiting 25 years for that. And, why speech? I believe it's, because God, he doesn't usually give all the details. He doesn't give all the plans, but he'll give it, little by little. But, Zechariah, in his spirit, he was asking for a complete, detailed outline of all things. And this was to kind of slow him down, to let him know that he's on God's time and not so much God on his. Or so the next verse says, and the people waited on Zechariah and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. So, I just ran through the whole sequence of scriptures earlier. So while he was in the, temple in the order of his course, number 8 out of 24, burning incense unto the Lord, that this angel appeared unto him. It was said that the multitude, they were without. That means that they were outside, either outside physically, or they were at, their locations, wherever that might be, at home, or wherever else they would have found themselves. They were also praying, but just not, physically in the temple with him. So they waited on him. I asked the question, were they allowed to pray inside with him? And I was not sure of the answer, and this kind of might give you a an indication that they were not, because it said that they waited on him and marveled that he tarried so long. Why did not somebody go inside, if they were marveling that because obviously this was not his first year of, doing this, sequence of 24. He had been doing it at least enough times for them to know, a timeline where he would come out. However long the prayer would take and the incense, was it the end of the week that he was to serve and, they tarried? Was it one of the days of the week that he would, burn incense and then come out. Just that was not the final day of the 7 days of the week that he was to serve. So it is said that they waited on him and they marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. The last place we saw this word was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he took the disciples. He told the eight, to sit, while he go and pray. Then he took with him Peter, James, and John and told him to tarry here, while he goes and pray. He came back, he found them asleep. He was upset. He said, could you not, watch and pray with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I explained how he wasn't expecting them to pray while he was, also praying. So this word tarry, it means that he was in there purposefully, communicating with God. He was not just, standing around. He was not, going on to looking about the external matters, the not so much, things that had not to do with some sort of, reverence before God or communicating, offering, something was going up, unto God in this tarrying. Whether it was the incense, as we see here, words, some sort of, offering. So they're outside waiting for him to come out. And, he should have been out by now. And they marveled. But we don't see anybody going inside. So, that might answer the question that I had. Or so the next verse says, and when he came out, he could not speak unto them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them and remained speechless. So, he comes out and being unable to speak, just like the angel promised. And, this is obviously something, out of the ordinary. He's never had these problems before. We know that when people get older, they do get strokes. And if they were, well stricken in age to have children, maybe they were close to the age of even, dealing with things like this. And like I said, modern medicine, they didn't have, the precautions to either monitor or treat, things like this. But here, from their reaction, we don't get the sense that they, thought it was like a medical emergency or, something having to do with, his physical body as a negative, sign of like disease, due to aging. We don't get the sense that they think or reason that it's on that level. So when he came out unto them, he could not speak. So imagine, them being outside waiting on him, marveling, as it said, that he tarried so long. Then now he comes out and he's unable to speak. So now I imagine they're trying to get to the bottom of all these things. They're looking at him, looking at each other, even maybe, trying to take him out a little bit to see, like I said, is this a medical emergency? Being unable to speak. I can imagine many things are going through their minds. For he beckoned unto them, and remained speechless. So now here is where, we see them able to get some good news. Because I imagine him beckoning unto them, having seen, this angel. First of all, I saw an angel, right? And he told me all these wonderful things that, prayers are answered. So I imagine the way that he's beckoning, he probably has a smile on his face. He's excited. His energy, I say, is what would, put them at ease. Because a person that's in trouble, in this aspect, you'll see the look on their face, they'll be cringing, like they're in pain or or something unpleasant. So, with this beckoning, I imagine that there was joy in his spirit. I imagine his face was excited or even, shocked a little bit, but not in a way that would cause concern. So he's beckoning onto them. He's using his hands. How do you beckon? It's with the hands, right? And the body language. And he's probably trying to, show them, signs of something like charades, but he remained speechless. He was unable to speak. And, him, serving in this temple during his course, we don't really see God communicating much after, the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, when they came out of captivity. This is kind of like the next thing we saw. Because then, after, Jesus, his, visitation by the angel to Mary came after this. Because remember, John the Baptist, he is older. So the Old Testament, closes, and then this is the next thing we see in the New. Is angel visiting, John the Baptist, parents. So angels and visitations and miracles and those things, we hadn't really seen much of those. So I would say that no, we didn't really see much of these happening in the temple where it would have been a regular thing. But, great news, our prayers are answered. We will have this child that we've been, wanting. I said earlier that God, he doesn't give the whole plan, of all things. Zacharias wanting, token that this thing will come to pass. He said that thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak. Because what if God had given him the whole plan that, because John the Baptist, he did get beheaded, right? That's how he died. What if you would have told them everything, even up to that point, that much detail, how would that have left them feeling? Would they have seen it as a blessing? I mean, it's better if that's what they're gonna do to him. It's better you don't give him unto us. Because that is their child, right? So when he came out, he could not speak unto them. Just like the angel said, and they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them and remained speechless. All right. So the next one says, and it came to pass after the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. So then like I said, I asked the question, was it towards the end of his week? No, because we see here him having more days. It doesn't say if this happened during like the second or third day, or in the middle of the third or fourth or towards the end. But we get kind of the sense that, this was not the last time he was in the temple. He went back at least one more. Now we know that prayer, before God, it's not required that we use words. So he was unable to speak, but he could, still pray in his mind. I would ask the question, him having seen this angel and not being unable to speak, would they have removed him from serving because of this? How can you be a priest and you're not able to speak? When people come in the temple and they need something, how are you going to communicate with them? This is obviously the first time anything like this has ever happened, but we see him get to keep his office, and we know that the next time he would go in there is after the birth of the child. So then, or maybe not even, because if they're serving twice a year, that means he's serving 24 weeks, after every 24 weeks he would serve. There being 24 rotations. So next time he went in there, he probably was still unable to speak because no child is born in 24 weeks, right? 9 months, 9 4 is 36 to 40 weeks. So this is not the end of his, ministration in the temple, offering of incense, and prayers, no doubt. So it came to pass when the end of his ministration was accomplished that he departed to his own house. So, like I said, they serve for 1 week at a time, twice in the year. So this did not happen towards the end, but some other day there was at least, and they would say it came to pass that when his ministration was accomplished, I imagine that there would be at least 2 or more days left. Or maybe they would use different language. So him having received this wonderful news, beckoning unto them, no doubt he was next time he went in, he was very observative, and expectant. Would this angel come and visit again? I would bet that he was looking for him to come again, even though he did not. All right, so the next one says, and after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived and hid herself 5 months. So it's very general when it says after those days. After what days? After the days of his ministration. Because he did go home. We know that if you look back at Abraham, his story, Sarah even laughed and she said within herself, when the child was born, who would have thought that Sarah would have given suck. When the angel was speaking unto her, one of the things she said was, who thought that, I would have pleasure at this age. Even Abraham, my Lord, being so much older. So Abraham and Sarah, if you read between the lines, you would see that they had stopped, being, physically intimate with each other. Was that the same thing here with John and his wife? Where their age is not given. But after the days of his ministration, he went home, with this blessing on him. This reminds me of, at the end when Jesus was risen and they had caught no fish all night. And he told them to put the net to the right side of the boat. And they said unto him, my Lord, we have tarried all night and we have caught nothing. But nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. And that's when they took in such a heavy catch, it began to sink the ship. So the blessing being given, upon the word, no doubt, this would be a child of their, own making, and not like Jesus, who was given, just by the word of God itself. So he went home with this blessing. And the next time that they were, together, then she would conceive. So it came to pass after these days, after the days of his ministration, no doubt. And, maybe there was a period of silence for a little while, or maybe not. Then she conceived and hid herself 5 months. So that they didn't have, pregnancy tests like we do. No doubt science wasn't that advanced. Pregnancy tests, they search for, a variety of hormones, HCG, human chorionic, gonadotrophin, estrogen, progesterone. So, the fact that she was pregnant, no doubt it was like a midwife, like one of those old wife, tales that they would, observe, her symptoms, how she would feel, the morning sickness, the tiredness, the heaviness, all these things. Maybe, even when she started to show a little bit. So she conceived and hid herself 5 months. I want to lean to the side that she was showing. And as soon as she realized, her baby bump, a lot of celebrities, they like to show theirs, but, she hid hers. Like I said, watching, they say the less people know about something, the better, because there's less, chances for something to go wrong. And it seems as if, it's like counting your eggs, before they hatch and then being so disappointed. So many times before, they did the right thing, remaining hidden. And like I said, when he came out of the temple, did he write, and communicate with them by writing? Did he tell, No doubt he tell his wife, what was to happen. So, the detection of this child, it must have came, so late. Symptoms and not so much, specific, targeting of a specific hormone. Alright, so the last one says, for she said, thus has the Lord dealt with me in the day wherein he looked upon me to take away my reproach among men. So, she's rejoicing here. She's speaking. These are one of those kind of timeless, a person speaking their truth, to the world. This is a statement for all to hear. It's a declaration. This is a proclamation of a change in her story. So thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the day wherein he looked upon me. So, the Lord looking upon her. This lets us know that there's a time when God, he looks upon us, individually. And you see, whatever thought he has towards you in his heart, we know that there is the righteous and we know that there are the wicked, depending on how you live your life. The sources that, you follow, things that you attain unto, things that you seek after, the things you surround yourself with, and who you are, will tell the kind of thoughts that God will have towards you. We know that the Lord, he looked upon the city of Sodom and Gomorrah and he said, I am come down to see, if the things that I have heard, if they be true. That was a negative case. Now here's a positive case, Elizabeth. So thus hath the Lord dealt with me. This is his judgment for me. They were and he looked upon me. He looked upon my affliction. He looked upon, the fact that we have no child. We serve you so hard. We are righteous. You're about to send your son. These very priests that he will have so much quarrel with are about to put him to. And I bet if I check, I'll see that a lot of them, all of them have children. None of them are barren. But look at them causing all these problems. Jesus, when they were accusing him of, casting out devils by Beelzebub, he asked them a question. He said, if I by Beelzebub do cast out devils, then by whom do your children cast them out? Knowing that they had children. So thus hath the Lord dealt with me. This is his judgment for me. He has found me worthy. But then is that to say then that some that are worthy, they still don't get to have? Many are the afflictions of the righteous, right? But the Lord delivered him out of them all. What is benefit of righteous, people like these having children? In that they will raise their children to be righteous. I mean, the world doesn't want to see that. The devil doesn't want to see that, right? So they actually have more going against them. Because imagine, water flowing in a river. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, rulers of darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. It's often said that the devil, he doesn't come after those that belong to him. No, it's the innocent and the righteous that he targets. So, them being described as, walking blamelessly and righteously before the Lord in all the commandments and ordinances, we'll see that, they have a huge target on their back. Blessing that was said about Abraham. What did God say? He know that Abraham, that he'll, bring up his children to fear him, to fear God, in a time where there was so much, idol sacrifices. So, thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the day wherein he looked upon me to take away my reproach among men. Reproach is was shameful, even though people they didn't come out and say it, outwardly. Because I mean, who would, be so, mean-hearted, say, to use this against somebody? I guarantee you, you get into a heated enough argument, somebody's gonna say that. You get into a heated exchange that's enough, emotions and egos, being thrown about. Everybody's putting everybody in their place. No doubt this is something that can be said about you. Hey, that's why you guys have no children. What kind of, wife is that you have? What kind of man are you? Are you unable to give your wife? The things that could be said. The promise from the angel is that thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. He shall be great before the Lord. Know that this one child is worth like 100 of these other, especially these chief priests, elders, and scribes, their children. So what did Jesus say? He said, among those born of women, there is not a greater than, John the Baptist. Nevertheless, he that is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. John the Baptist being used as the standard, the measuring stick. So to take away my reproach among men, to have no children. And when there was no social media in those days, people weren't getting likes, walking around with dogs in strollers. People weren't posting videos of their cats. We have a lot of couples that they choose to have cats and dogs, instead of children. Having children was like flocks. When Job was listed, his wealth, it was that he had 7,000, I believe it was, goats, 7,000 sheep. And the number of his cattle was listed. And his children, that's how he was, his riches were described. So children were actually, considered a huge part of one's wealth. I am Straw Greenhorn.